Hello and welcome back to How to D&D More Good with me, Dread Roberts. Today I've got John, my friend John Large from Red Dice Diaries joining me. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome indeed. As is customary, could you give the viewers a little bit of information about who you are, what your history is with TTRPGs, and feel free to throw in any shameless plugs you want.
Yeah, thanks. I probably started with tabletop RPGs when I was in my sort of mid-teens or maybe slightly earlier, and I've been playing the sort of like the Games Workshop, like Warhammer and stuff like that beforehand. And me and like a few friends at school, we used to go to like the tournaments they used to do in Nottingham and stuff like that. And anyone who sort of went to the tournaments, you got ranked in like a number of like different areas. So you got so many points for winning games, so many points for your painting. Then you also got like a tiny sort of like little nugget of points, like if you came up with like an interesting army, or you had like a bit of an interesting backstory for it. So for me, like, it quickly became obvious that I was enjoying like creating the armies and going like, oh, what weird sort of army can I come up with, more than I was actually enjoying like the battles at the thing. So when I sort of segued from there into tabletop RPGs like via Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So I was like, oh, I know the background for this. It's Warhammer,
And there's a cool game as well.
yeah, exactly. And it seems to be a bit more of this, like it's more sort of like making things up and inventing stuff, which is the bit I liked in Warhammer when we went to the tournament. So I sort of segued into that for a bit, and me and my friend sort of did a little bit of that on and off, and then that sort of turned into other games. Like seemingly everyone of our sort of age, I played like all the World of Darkness games in the 90s. I did a bit of like the Mind's Eye Theatre games. We had some people like running a local game in my area. Ran various games. I lived with a few people who were role players for a while when I was sort of late teens, early 20s, and we played a lot of games there. And then after that, I stopped really running as many games or like playing in as many games because I live in like a small town. There wasn't like a big pool of like people I knew who were like into gaming. Obviously, people move away and stuff like that. And then I'd been sort of watching a few like people on YouTube, and a guy called Tim was just like, oh well, there are people playing games online. Why don't you like give that a go? So I did a few YouTube videos. That led to me sort of like meeting up. I say meeting up, like virtually meeting up with some like players via like Zoom and stuff like that, and it just opened up a world of like a massive pool of players. It's like the game I'm running now. We've got like a player in like Ireland, we've got a player in Finland, and we've got a couple of people here in the UK, and it's just people that I never would have had the opportunity to like game with if it weren't for being online. Then obviously with the recent sort of like lockdowns and whatever, loads more people sort of got into gaming online. So it just sort of spiraled from there really, and I suppose I sort of went the opposite way to a lot of people, whereas I sort of started out with Warhammer, then I went into more sort of like in inverted commas storyteller games, and I was big into like Fate for the longest time. And then after that I was like, oh, do you know what, I've never really I've always fancied like having to go at this like old D&D, but I never had like the nostalgia or like any of the books back then. So, and I was like, oh right, there's people like making like new versions of it, but like based on the old rules. So I got into that, and that's pretty much what I'm running at the minute.
Cool. Yeah, we can go into that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
So today, I mean, one of the reasons I'm quite glad you're talking to me is because I guess we're both. I don't know if this is right. Like, are you sort of primarily the DM/GM in games?
Yeah, I mean, it started to sort of like diverge a little bit now because, like I say, I've got a bigger pool of people with sort of like the online gaming. So I'm actually playing in a few games now, but so back in my history, I've mainly been a GM rather than a player.
Yeah. So I've sort of said on it a few times. I've been GMing for a long time. I had a big, quite a big break in the middle, but 20 plus years now, I've sort of been running games in various forms. So it's cool that we can sort of get into a lot more of the nitty gritty and sort of how to run games efficiently. Because I've had quite a few videos about how to play well and how to sort of explore characters, but there's a definite different skill set to sort of particularly world building and running a game for other people. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about it as well, sort of how the game should work, and I've heard a lot of horror stories in how bad games go down. So, but before we go into that in sort of full detail, you've got your own YouTube channel as well, haven't you? So
Yeah, I've got the YouTube channel Red Dice Diaries, and it's mostly used now to sort of like host video versions of like the podcast that I do, which is again a similar thing. It's just me like talking about things that interest me, rather like you're doing yourself, talking about things that interest me with tabletop role playing and like doing some like hints and tips and like GM tips and stuff like that.
You've got a website as well, haven't you? Because I went on and the fun story. I don't think I actually told you this. I was prepping a game and I was oh shit, I need to fill some space. I swear all you want, by the way. This is like an adult channel. I can't control my foul mouth. But yeah, I was like,
all right, man.
I need some quick ideas. And it was like, I think it might be forest encounters or swamp encounters or something. I was googling and I was going through now that rubbish, and I found a list. I was like, oh, these are really cool, and then clocked it was your website on the top. So I was like accidentally, oh no shit, it's John's website. Nice.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I've probably been a bit lax recently, but I like to. I'm a big fan of like random charts and random encounters because like, everyone's had that sort of moment where you're like, oh, I need some here, but like the wells run dry.
My brain is just gone.
So any time I sort of think of something and I'm like, oh, I bet I could make a good like random table out of that, I try and just like drop it onto the website. Because I've not done so much recently because I've mainly been like focusing on the podcast, and then the last couple of weeks, as I was saying before we started, I've been like mad prepping for like various games. So like that's taken a bit of a back seat, but I'm hoping once we've got the next sort of 2 weeks out of the way, I can sort of jump back on that again.
Yeah. So, well, yeah. No further ado, let's get into it. So, like DM and how to DM more good. We had sort of 2 points, but that we sort of discussed beforehand.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't remember your second one. You said about brain going wild, but the first thing we said was ensuring that good communication between your GM and your players, and sort of how crucial that is to running a good game. I don't know if that's something you could expand on for us. And
yeah, I mean, as you were saying, I think there's a lot of articles out there about how to run the game, but certainly in my experience, there's not that many articles about basic communication and how to improve your communication, which is a bit weird because when you think about it, at its most basic, so D&D or the tabletop RPGs, it's basically a group of people sat around talking to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have like your bells and whistles, your VTTs, your miniatures, your maps, whatever. But if you don't have the talky bit, you're not really playing a tabletop RPG.
No, it might as well be a board game if that's the case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's. I can see the appeal of games.
I'm not knocking board games, by the way. Board game fans out there, I'm just making a distinction.
That's fine. Knock 'em all you want. I'm not a board game fan, but no, I'm just kidding. Board games, but
don't kill us. Don't come
exactly.
Us.
Yeah, but I just find it really bizarre. Cause, I mean, like I can see the appeal of like board games and war games and stuff like that because they don't require as much of an investment from like the GM. And they don't need a GM to be able to do them. Like if you want to play a war game, if you've got 2 people, you've got the models, and your dice, you're set, off you go. Whereas obviously if you're doing a tabletop RPG, the GM's got to put that prep time in, they've got to create stuff, you've got to play a character, it's a bit more involved. So I can see the appeal, but like I say, it's just a bit strange. There don't seem to be a lot of tips or a lot of articles discussing, I mean, even just basic things like, like speaking clearly in a voice that carries and like trying to make your descriptions clear, occasionally checking with your players or like making sure they've understood what you've said, just like really basic stuff. And I think a lot of that is because, and I've done it myself, you just take it for granted, don't you? Well, I'm going to talk to people, they'll understand what I'm saying. I chat to people all the time, that's absolutely fine. But the voice of the GM in a tabletop RPG, that's like the player's window into the game world. Yeah. If you don't describe something well, or you say it in a confusing or sort of like oblique way, then your players are going to get confused, and if they don't know what they can do in the game, it can just grind to a halt.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. It's kind of set in what is possible within the realms of the world you've created. Yeah. But without explicitly stating outright, but kind of explaining the surroundings and the sort of the situations that are occurring with. Not with too much detail that you kind of guide them in a particular direction, but enough detail that they've got multiple opportunities to explore within it. Which is really easier said than done, but I think once you get the hang of it, it comes quite natural, I think.
That's it. As I say, I think it's one of those things where once you have got the sort of hang of it, it's like everything. You just sort of tend to forget about it. Well, of course we know how to talk to people. Of course we know how to do this. Whereas if you're just starting out, like things like that might not even occur to you, or you might not think, oh yeah, I need to occasionally stop and say to the players, are you sure you got what I was saying here?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just really basic stuff like encouraging your players to ask like questions, and so creating an environment where they feel like if they're unsure about something, they can say to you like, "Oh, say, is it? I think the barn looks like this that we're going into. Is that right?" And if you encourage them to ask that, you can sort of catch any mistakes early, and you can say, "Oh, actually, no, it's twice the size of that. You've got like, the measurements a bit wrong." Or you can say, "Oh, there's not actually like a cart in there. That was just an example." And it's far better to find that out at the start than so like when you're in like at the middle of an encounter or whatever, and someone goes, "Oh, I'm going to leap into the cart," and you're like, "Oh, Father, there isn't a cart in there," and then you have to sort of go through all of that, and the sort of the pacing you've sort of built up and any sort of tension you've built up just disappears like that, because you've suddenly got to stop and answer a load of questions. Where if you're maybe a bit more clearer at the start and you sort of encourage any questions to be asked early doors, you know, it saves on the work later. Basically, you're sort of front loading all the work.
Mm-hmm. But are there any sort of kind of common communication issues you've sort of come across and how to deal with them? I know I've realised that's quite a vague question.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the obvious things, silly in like D&D and like dungeon crawl style games and whatever, is this is why VTTs and maps are so often used. I think because it's very difficult to visualise like a dungeon or a building if someone's just describing it verbally. Yeah. Whereas if you can plonk a picture down and go, "Oh, it looks like that. This is what the measurements are. Like each square's 5 foot or whatever, and that's what this means." And you point to the symbols on the map. The people have got a reference point. Whereas if you're just describing it, you're like, "Oh, you walk down this corridor. It's 5 foot wide. It's 30 foot long. Then it turns at a right angle, goes for another 60 foot." By the time you've described like 3 rooms and a few corridors, people won't have a clue what they're doing and where they are. Yeah. So I think there's some things where, you know, having aids to communication like maps and stuff like that can be really useful. But again, also don't just wait for the players to like bring stuff up. Just like occasionally check that they understand what you're saying. So if you use this like fictional barn as an example, if you're like, "Oh yeah, you're in a barn, it's 20 foot by 20 foot and there's a small bale of hay in the corner," you can just say to everyone, "Oh, is everyone okay with that?" And then if anyone's got any questions, you're sort of giving them permission, if you like, to actually ask questions, rather than them sort of, especially if they're a new group and they're not used to you, rather than them sitting there and thinking, "Oh, I'm not really sure about this, but I don't want to like just jump in and ask a question." If you're literally saying to them like, "Oh, is that fine? Anyone got any questions?" It sort of takes that first step, and they probably feel a bit more comfortable with talking to you about it.
Oh, great! That's a good shout. I think you can fall a victim of that sometimes as a DM, because if you have a really clear picture in your mind, I know, I do try and do maps, and I think with my most current campaign I've got a little bit lax with it recently, but I think because we're quite so established all the plot, we don't really always need them. But I forgot what point I was trying to make then. Yeah, if it's all inside your own head and you've got a very clear image, you have to understand that's not the same image the players will have in their mind. Like every player will visualize this scene slightly differently. So, like you said, the more ways you can get of kind of standardizing it so that they're all roughly on the same page, the better, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think an obvious example of this is, when you come, like in a D&D-esque game, when you come to like a puzzle or something like that, or a mystery or something that requires a bit of a deductive reasoning. So how many times have people, I mean, probably yourself, I know certainly I have done, when you create what you think is like a nice simple puzzle and you're like, "Oh, this won't slow them down for long, it's very easy." And then you get to it in a game and the players are all like scratching their heads and going like, "Oh, don't really get this, I'm not sure what's going on." They take ages to work it out. And that's no sort of shade on the players, because obviously it's very easy when you're the GM and you created it and you've got all the facts under your command. Whereas from someone else's point of view, it might not seem quite as simple, and it's very easy to sort of fall into that trap where you're like, "Oh, well, I know all of this, I understand it. Everyone else will." And as you were saying, that's not always the case.
What would you do to help people then in that situation? Because I know you can give them hints, or like a cheating method feels almost like an NPC could pop up and give them hints. But have you kind of picked up any tricks for sort of helping guiding them towards a solution, or
Well, if it's like a puzzle or something like that, what I generally do, and I don't use a lot of puzzles in games, but the way I generally do it is I make a sort of puzzle and I think, "Oh, that's fairly easy," and then if I think, "Oh, that's easy," I then make it a bit easier, because I'm like, okay, that seems easy to me, but I make it a bit easier just to hedge my bets.
Right.
And I genuinely try and avoid sort of puzzles and mysteries that only have one solution, because if there's only one way you can solve something, it can be very difficult to sort of like find that one little path through the sort of like the briar patch. Whereas if there's a few different ways it can be solved, it's more likely the players are going to stumble on it, or they're going to work out one of the ways of solving it.
Sure.
Or they might sort of brute force their way through it. Another good thing to do is if they come up with a feasible solution, and you're like, well, it's not what I've got written down in my notes, but it seems feasible, I'd probably just roll with it, to be honest. Yeah.
We had one like that recently, so it was the long and short was a sort of quite a dangerous chasm. If you fall into it, you're going to take serious damage, or you're going to die, and it's just an obstacle to get across, and just another way for them to use some of the skills. They've all got things like dimension door. They're quite high level characters, so they can teleport. They can do all sorts of cool ways of getting across it. But then the fighter with a 20 strength worked out their carrying capacity and realised that because all of the characters are quite small, they could feasibly throw everybody in the party over that distance. Because I thought this is a reasonable distance. You can't. It's a bit too big to jump across. But we went through the tables and figured it out. So do you know what? Okay, do me like 5 athletics rolls. Don't mess any of them up. I thought that would keep them stumped for at least 10 minutes. But the fighter's like, no, just leg and a wing everyone.
Lob everybody over. Yeah.
That's it, done. It's like, yeah, cool, if that's what you want to do.
But yeah, another good way of sort of like getting around that is quite often I'll throw a situation into a game and I don't necessarily come up with like, this is the de facto solution. I might not even write down a solution in my notes. Okay. I'll just be like, here's the situation. Because players, like most of them, are like really quite inventive. Mm-hmm. So if you just sort of say, oh yeah, there's this ogre who's guarding this bridge, and you've got to get across the bridge, there's a raging torrent, the bridge is the only way, this ogre's watching it, he's got his big club, he's walloping everyone who goes across the bridge. They'll find some way to get round it with what they've got, and they might just do the old favourite and sort of brute force their way across and be like, yeah, we're all warriors, we've got shields, let's attack the ogre and take him down. But there might be a thief who's like, oh, I'm going to like crawl underneath the bridge and sort of in the shadows, or there might be someone who goes, oh, well, I'm going to rope myself off and I'm going to wade through the river and just risk it. The players, if you invest like a bit of trust in them, they'll come up with a solution to it, and you don't necessarily have to have one written down. And I think sometimes if you've got it written down, it can be tempting that if they come up with another solution and you're like, oh, it's not what's on the sheet, the temptation is to say, oh, well, no, that doesn't work because it's not what's down here. But in sort of doing that, you're basically sort of saying to the players, oh, I know you spent a lot of time coming up with this and coming up with this creative idea, but like, I'm sorry, no dice. Whereas if you're like, oh, well, yeah, it's not what I've got written down here, but it might work. Tell you what, give us a couple of rolls, like you were saying with your throwing over the chasm. Give us a few rolls, and if the rolls are good, great. If the rolls are bad, maybe it doesn't work. But again, that's not you just saying, no, it doesn't work. That's just like, oh, the dice rolls have gone against you. That's sometimes how it goes.
I love that as well. I really do, because some DMs sometimes feel like the story is about them, and it's about the players experiencing how cool their story is, how inventive. Where it's not, it never will be. You have to be quite selfless in a way, I think, when you're running the game, because it's about the players, because they're the heroes, and it's about their experience through the world, not the story you create. It's the old cliche, isn't it? If you don't want the players to be the heroes, don't run a game, write a book.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that often gets said with like the sort of the OSR, like old school versions of D&D, is the story is just whatever happens in the game. So it's and what they mean by that is it's not, you don't set out some grand story in advance that you're hoping the players go through. You're just like, here's the world. There's some stuff going on in it. Go do what you do. Be heroes. Do your thing, and then whatever they get up to, that's what the story is,
because they're experiencing it from the character's point of view and not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There might be things happening in the wider world, but as happens with this world, if you don't actually go and engage with it, you won't know it. You won't see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons of the sort of D&D games I prefer to run, like the sort of hex crawl sort of open world stuff, where you just like, here's a small area map. I've put like a few encounters and a few dungeons and whatever on it. Here's the little like town or whatever you're starting in. Right, go do what you do best, adventurers, and then you just let them wander around on their own. They do whatever they're doing. If they go, oh yeah, we want to stay in town and we want to find out what's going on with the local nobles, you run with that. If they go, oh, we've heard there's a dungeon over there, we're going to like trek 3 days into the wilderness, you run with that. And it's whatever they choose to get up with, that's what becomes the story.
So converse to that, which is what I'm hoping my next game is a bit more like that. But the one we're just finishing it off, we've got the last session next week. And I'm hoping this one has been not quite a railroad, but it's been very plot heavy. So it's been quite a linear sort of game, really. And we've enjoyed it, but it's been a different way of playing. But I'm going on tangents. What was your second point that you told me about the other day?
Yeah, my second one is talking about prep, and it's the idea of only doing as much game prep as you need and that you feel comfortable with doing. I mean, to be honest, it's probably a bit hypocritical of me because I was saying before we started, I've been doing like mad prep for like this small like local con like drop-in games I'm doing. I mean, I've got a giant map just over there behind me, which I'm going to be putting. I've got like stacks of A4 paper just down there where I've like plotted out the encounters in like every hex and everything. But to be honest, I'm expecting like 90% of it won't get used. You know, I mean, got the sort of map down there. If you can see that, it's like a little like island hex crawl. I'm expecting 90% of it won't get used, but I've done that because I've got the time. It's something I enjoy doing, and I'm probably going to reuse it for a future game, so like, it's not going to get wasted if it doesn't get used. And I mean, I'm guilty of doing loads of prep for like every game, but I used to find sort of back in the day that I used to get like really burnt out as a campaign went on. Because you almost put so much pressure on yourself to do all this prep every session that eventually like something happened with your job or in like real life and you're like, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And then I'd find myself being like, oh well, I can't do the prep I want to do. Your enthusiasm starts waning for the game, and once you're on that sort of like downward spiral, it's very difficult to like pull yourself out of it.
So I remember hearing something about prep. It was someone I was watching on YouTube, I can't remember who, was saying, and I don't know if I agree with this or not, that you should only prep for the next session. And
yes, I have heard that, yeah.
Just prep for the next session. While I think it sounds great, it's also like super simplified, because sometimes you want to build up an arc. You want a kind of, you want like 8 sessions and then kind of run it almost like seasons in a TV show. You've got the end of season finale and then you start the second season arc. Like Buffy was a good example, like an end of arc villain. And you can keep lots of those going, but I'll have like a good prep for the next session or two, but then I'll have like a bit of loose prep after that.
I do a similar thing. Because what I'll like say with my sort of hex crawl stuff, I'll have like the area that the players are in sort of more prepped out because I know that's where they're likely to explore. But I'll also have just sort of loosely sketched out like the wider world stuff that's going on. So let's say they're in a kingdom and I've got this kingdom mapped out, and I know there's a kingdom to the north that's like ramping up for war and they're getting ready to declare war on the southern kingdom. I won't define the northern kingdom in as great detail, but I'll just have a few notes, be like, oh yeah, they've got a strong military, they've got like a mad wizard in charge of them or whatever, and he's got his army of hobgoblins or whatever, and I'll have that lightly sketched out. So if the players are like, oh, have we heard any rumours about this northern kingdom, I can portray that consistently because I've got like my little notes. And if I say something like, oh yeah, you found this out, I can add that to like my little notes. So when I come to look at it next time, I'm keeping that consistency going.
Yeah. But
I don't really need to sort of drill down into that level of detail until the players actually decide to go there or until the war actually like kicks off. So that's how I sort of tend to do it.
That's it. Seems like a sensible way of doing it. Do you like dropping hint? If you've got some kind of wider world plot, because we all like to sort of just go and do a dungeon and get the reward from town session, but if there is like an overarching world plot, which I think helps to have something in mind, even if it's kind of vaguely defined like you said, but do you like dropping little hints in of what's to come? Because I find I do that a lot.
In a way, I mean, what I tend to do in my games, like I say, because they are quite sort of open world, I sort of use I forget where I saw it, I got it off somewhere online, but I use like a very simple like faction system. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll go, all right, there's 6 or whatever, like half a dozen groups that are like the power players in my setting, and I basically decide like, oh, that this group's quite powerful, this is like a small local thieves guild or whatever, and then I basically just take a handful of dice, and like the more powerful the faction is, like the bigger the dice I use. So the most powerful might be a D20. If it's like a little like street gang, it might be a D4. And I like roll them in a container, and if I get any of the 2 dice that are touching, I go, right, there's been an encounter between those 2 factions.
That's cool. I like that.
And then all I do is I look at the numbers on the 2 dice that are touching, and I go, right, the one with the highest number, that's the one who came off better in this encounter.
That's really cool. I like that. Yeah,
like I said, I'd love to take credit for it, but I like robbed it off somewhere online.
Nothing's original these days.
Yeah, like everything. You know what I mean? But I sort of adapted it a little bit from a couple of things that people have posted online, and it's very simple. And obviously, once you've rolled and you go, all right, these 2 factions have had a bit of a dust up or whatever, you've still got to like decide what it is, but you don't need to have it down in like a great deal of detail. So in the campaign I'm running at the minute, which is like an old school Essentials campaign, we've got a group which is basically this evil wizard who like turned himself into a dragon, and the players sort of, so we had a bit of like a time skip, but we had the players knew him when he was human, and then when they finished his time skip, they were like, oh, he's done that thing he was going to do, he's turned himself into a big dragon. And he's sort of sending out like agents and like changelings and stuff like that, trying to infiltrate the other kingdoms. So I just happened to roll on my faction roll, which I do like before the game, so I can like write up anything interesting. I was like, all right, okay, there's been an encounter between this like dragon kingdom and the sort of human kingdom that the players are going to next session, and but the human kingdom came off best. So I was like, okay, I'll say that they tried to send an infiltrator in, but the human kingdom like caught them. They sort of sabotaged their they like blew up one of the city gates basically, but they managed to like capture him, and they like executed him. So when the players got there, I had sort of like, oh, you know, they're rebuilding the gates. There's guards stood around, and they're like, oh, what happened here? And he's like, oh yeah, we caught one of those changelings and stuff like that. And having that sort of stuff go on, which I didn't prepare until I'd done the role, it keeps it interesting for me, because I personally find if I've scripted everything out, I'm just sort of like going through it like A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, and it's not very interesting. Whereas if I suddenly have to go, oh right, okay, yeah, there's been this encounter, I've got to think about it. And it's also interesting for the players, because they know I'm doing this. I've told them that this is how I do it, so they know that like when stuff comes up, they're like, oh yeah, so that's just like, it feels like the world's like moving on, and it's not just me like pre-plotting everything, and it gives that sort of that illusion of like it being a real world and stuff going on in the background.
Yes. Yeah, the old what's it called, suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And how so important that is. I mean, it's cool actually. I like little tricks like that. I mean, yeah. I've not done a big hex crawl for a while. I'm really keen actually on the idea. I've come with a few downtime systems, so I may pick your brain at some point on how to do it.
Yeah,
I've got like a continent-based hex crawl. I may have like go big. Why not? But
yeah, why not, mate?
We'll sort of see what happens. But like, I suppose you've got a bit more time. I want to chat about kind of NPCs as well, because one of my favourite bits of running D&D games is I love doing the NPCs, and I talked to someone else on one of these how some of the ones I think are going to be really cool and they'll like, they think like that guy's just a dickhead, like we don't have any interaction with him. That one minor NPC who's suddenly like, oh, this person's really wise and really informed, and it's kind of you have an idea when you create an NPC of what they're like, but your players shape who they are, and they can often end up completely different. You know, have you got sort of any tips or any sort of anecdotes on?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to predict like what NPCs the players are going to sort of gel with, they're going to like, they're going to hate. If you put all your effort into like a particular NPC, and you're like, yeah, this is going to be like the big bad guy, or this is going to be like the big patron who's going to help them out or whatever, it always ends up falling flat, because they're like, nah, I'm not bothered with this guy. And then they'll be some like scrote who's like sweeping up the street, and they'll be like, oh, that guy's really interesting, and they'll like want to find out everything about him. But I mean, we had in a game I ran ages ago, Rob Benford was playing it. Actually, he ended up with they were just like hiring some like random retainers in a town. And I was rolling on some random tables to see like what the retainers look like, and I was like, oh, there's this guy called like Hamish. He's like massively fat. He's got like woe tattoos all over him, big like gingerbeard. Your stereotypical like dwarf troll slayer sort of type. And I was like, oh, what's he doing in this tavern? And I was like, just pulled it out of my backside. I was like, oh, he's eating out of a jar of pickled eggs in the tavern. Rob's character went over to him, and he was like, oh, I bet I can eat more pickled eggs than you. And like, and literally every time they sort of met up, they had like, they'd be like challenging each other to eat as many of these pickled eggs. And so about 6 sessions later, like that NPC, that retainer, ended up like dying or trying to cross a river, and they had to make rolls to like shimmy across this rope, and him being like massive and not very dexterous, failed his roll and got swept off down the river, and the players were all absolutely gutted, and it was just this random like retainer who like happened to like eat eggs. So you can never really tell. So the only tip I can really give with regards to that is, don't sort of plan that this is going to be the big NPC. Just sort of like drop a sort of broad selection of NPCs in, then pay attention to the ones that the player characters engage in, and then once you just go, oh yeah, they really like that dude, or they're not so keen on this person, then you can sort of start investing more in them and building them up. So if they, like for instance, let's say they're exploring the town and a captain of the town guard like pulls them up on something, and fucking hate that dude, it's always like getting my shit. You can be like, all right, I'm gonna make him I'm gonna lean into him, I'm gonna make him like a bit more villainous and a bit more hard ass, and have him like show up a few times and like interfere with like the player's stuff, because they already hate him, so why not lean into it? Like the work's already been done for them.
They've done it, haven't they? To try and keep track of all this stuff, I find it quite useful on the Discord. With playing online now, it's just standard to have a Discord for the game. I'll have a factions and individuals page where it's kind of everyone they've met and had like an actual conversation with and has been given a name. I'll add them in. So when it starts off, you may have met just your starting guild and the guy from the market or something. But by the end of the game, you can end up with a huge long list of various people they've met. It saves me so much effort having to go through pages and pages of notes. Oh, what about our contact in the Queen's Guard? All right, okay, let's go. Oh yeah, I remember the name now. Let's try and remember the accent. Then go.
Yeah, I mean, I do a similar thing. I've basically got like like the free sort of WordPress like websites you can set up. I've basically got one of them which I've sort of set up like a little like wiki, and any like important NPCs and like session write-ups and stuff like that, I just drop onto that website, so if the players need to refresh their memory, they can just go back and have a quick look at it.
I am worried that maybe we're making it sound like, because I think you strike me as similar to me, like we put a lot of time and prep into a game.
Yeah,
but you absolutely don't have to. I mean, you can, by all means, if you want to, like, do, because your players will love it. But you absolutely don't have to do that to run a convincing game.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the big things that sort of started me off doing less prep is there's a book by Mike Shea called Sly Flourish's Return of the Lazy GM, and it basically just breaks down like an 8 bullet point process,
right?
Which it's sort of, here's the prep that you can do to, and it's things like review characters, create a strong start, outline potential scenes, define secrets and clues, develop locations, outline your NPCs, choose your monsters, and choose like the rewards, the treasure. And the whole book focuses on the idea of like only prepare what benefits your game. And a lot of the book is like, well, if you haven't got time for these like 8 bullet points, here's how you can like only do like a few of them, and you can still run a decent game. And like you say, you can do mad amounts of prep if you have time and you enjoyed it. Like I said, I've been doing loads of this con because I've got the time and I enjoy it. But as you rightly say, you don't have to do that in order to run a decent game. You just need enough prep so that you can run your game consistently. So you're not like, they're not meeting an NPC one week and you're like, oh, he's like a 6 foot tall guy with like ginger hair, and the next time they meet him he's like a 4 foot dwarf with like a massive black beard. So you have to keep it consistent, but also the main benefit of the prep is just to make sure that you're comfortable as a GM running the game. So some people are very good at like the improv, and they might just be like, oh yeah, there's some townspeople here, and if the players are like, oh well, what are the townspeople are like, they might be comfortable just riffing with it and doing stuff like that. I sort of, whereas other people might like to have it all written out, I sort of fall in the middle somewhere where I'm quite happy to do a bit of improvisational stuff, but I also like having a few like random tables and stuff, so if I do draw a bit of a blank, I can just quickly like roll a few dice and I'm good to go.
I did a game. I talked about the improv. I ran a game once as a bit of an experiment. I think it only lasted 8 or 9 sessions, but the game was 100% improv. So just like challenging myself and see if I can. And you know what? I will never do that again. It was so hard, and it was this bizarre world, and everything just got overly weird and strange. And
that's for me the prep, the random tables, all that, the whole thing, it's just there as like idea generators for the GM. because we all have days when you had a rough day at work, you maybe not slept well, you're feeling tired, you've got other things on your mind, but you're like, I don't want to cancel the game because I enjoy running it and the players enjoy playing it. I want to run the game, but you might just not have the sort of like the mental like real estate on that particular day to like come up with all this stuff whole cuff. So if you need to like nick an adventure out of a module, you need to roll some random tables, you need to pull some stuff out of books, whatever you need to do, as long as it helps you sort of like over those like mental hurdles.
Absolutely. It's a good shout. We unfortunately we're sort of coming to the end of the time. So if I've got quite a few. I was going to ask you a sort of question. I'm leading into a question. I'm not just rambling on a tangent.
That's
again,
all good.
I've got quite a few players who've been playing a long time and haven't DM'd themselves. And sometimes it'd be nice, I'm the forever DM, but I am playing in some games. It'd be nice for them to have a go and see if they enjoy it, because I do feel like it's something you don't know you'd enjoy until you've actually tried it.
Yeah.
Are there any tips you'd give for someone in how to like start their first game, or how to get started with running a game?
I would say, first of all, stick with a game or a system that you know, like one you've already played in. So if you, let's use a stereotypical one, you've been playing D&D for like since God was a boy, it's going to be more difficult. You can do it, it's going to be more difficult for you if you're suddenly like, oh, I'm gonna run Vampire the Masquerade, and you've not run it before, or you've not played it. Whereas I would suggest for your first game, stick with a system that even if you've not run it, you've played it, because you'll have some idea of how it works. You know the sort of thing that goes on in those sort of games. And presumably if you're running it for the same group that you've been playing in, the rest of the group will also be familiar with that style of game because you've all been playing in it. So I would say stick with that. And I'd also say scale your ideas appropriately for like your first game, because everyone's first game is like a bit naff. That's just how it goes. You get better by doing it. Basically, it's like anything. It's like, well, you play instruments. The first time you picked up an instrument, you weren't as good at playing it as you are now. It's the same with GMing. You only get better through doing it. And most players will understand if you're like, oh, this is my first game I'm running, and it's maybe a bit rocky or it's not the finished article. Most people are fine as long as they still have fun. It's all good. But if you start off your first game, you're like, oh, I'm going to run this Game of Thrones style epic across multiple continents, and it's going to be a 60-year campaign, and it's going to be this, that, and the other. You're sort of you're overreaching it. That won't happen. Whereas if you're just like, oh, I tell you what, we're just going to run you guys going through like a simple dungeon, or we're even just going to run like 3 or 4 sessions just to see how we get on. Because then, if you want to, afterwards, you can always expand and carry on running and do other stuff. But if you say, oh, I'm just going to run like a handful of sessions, we're going to do like a very simple adventure, or even a pre-published module, you can sort of dip your toe in the water, see if you like it or not. If you don't, no harm, no foul. It's not for everybody. You can say, well, at least I gave it a go. It's not for me. Whereas if you do enjoy it and the players are enjoying it, you can always say, oh, would you be up for me GMing something else? And you can then move on. And as you get more experience, then you can sort of gradually like ramp up your ideas until you're doing like big campaigns and stuff like that.
So sage advice, I'd say. Do you fancy coming back and chatting to me again in the future? I'm sure we could go into sort of more detail.
Yeah, I'll
be
these points. More than happy to anytime, man.
Awesome. John, nice one. Thanks very much for chatting to me today. It's
no problems. Thank you for having me.
I will. I'll put the links to sort of Red Dice Diaries, John's YouTube page and website under the video when it goes live. So feel free to sort of check it out, subscribe to him, and give him a like. And same for me. So right, bye everyone. It's bye from me.